He's a burden, Sonia. And this old house, it's just trouble, Ricardo grumbled, his voice low but laced with impatience, echoing through the slightly ajar door. Osvaldo, motionless in his rocking chair, felt the words like stones, hitting a wound he had carried for years. He doesn't even know what he's doing anymore. He lives in Mariana's memory. And we're here, waiting for what? Sonia replied, a heavy sigh, barely disguising her boredom. It wasn't the first time Osvaldo had heard their tone change when they thought he wasn't around, but the rawness of that moment was different. It was as if, suddenly, the veil covering the truth of their hearts had been torn away. He felt the cold invade his bones, not from the rain outside, but from the loneliness deepening within him. What do you do when those you loved most, those you raised, seem to see in you only a burden, a waiting game? Reflect with me. Have you ever felt invisible to those who should see you clearly? Tell us in the comments, write your name and the city you're watching from. I want to hear your story and welcome you to our community. Osvaldo closed his eyes, his thin eyelids trembling. The wrinkles on his face seemed to deepen, each one a map of a life he had built in silence. He remembered when they were children, the laughter, the tight hugs, the promises of eternal care. Where was all that now? Instead of affection, he heard cold calculation, a veiled disinterest behind the facade of perfunctory visits. They spoke of inheritance, not affection. They spoke of problems, not well-being. Ricardo continued, with a tone that tried to be practical, but sounded cruel. This house isn't worth much, Sonia. At most, the land, and whatever money he has, if he has any, must be stashed under the mattress, like these old folks do. We can't expect much, Sonia agreed. Exactly. And we need to sort out our lives. My apartment renovation is stalled. You with your store debts, we can't keep depending on Dad's good graces. The words mingled with the sound of the rain, but for Osvaldo, every syllable was clear, sharp, cutting. They didn't know. They had no idea who he really was, what he had built. He had always been a discreet man, a silent observer. In the village of São Miguel do Campo, everyone knew him as Mr. Osvaldo, the widower who lived in the old family house with his well-kept yard and his stories from other times. No one imagined that behind that calm demeanor and seemingly simple life, there was a sharp mind for business, a knack for opportunities that few saw. For decades he had worked, not just on the farm but investing, buying small plots of land, betting on seeds no one wanted, on businesses that seemed to have no future. He built a modest but solid empire, brick by brick, quietly, without ostentation. Why? Why so much secrecy? Perhaps he wanted to prove something. Perhaps he hoped love would come pure, without the shadow of financial interest. But now, listening to his children, he saw that his strategy had failed spectacularly. They didn't love him. Or worse, they loved a poor and convenient version of him. He rose from his chair, the creak of the wood almost drowning out the sound of his own thoughts. He walked slowly to the small, solid wooden desk, as old as he was, in the corner of the room. He opened the middle drawer, rarely touched by other hands, and pulled out a plain brown envelope, already a little yellowed with time. It was a simple envelope, unstamped, with no external sender, but inside Osvaldo kept the silent proof of a part of his secret life. Every month he received one of these. Inside was a bank statement from an investment account few knew about, at a bank branch in a neighboring city, much larger than São Miguel do Campo. It was a discreet document, with numbers that grew silently, without drawing attention. He examined it, not with euphoria but with a methodical calm, almost like a ritual. To his children, if they happened to see it, it would just be another old paper of their father's, perhaps an electricity bill, or some other random statement. They never bothered to ask. This envelope, with its carefully guarded contents, was the first sign, the first clue that Osvaldo's life was much more complex than it seemed. He returned to the chair, holding the statement in his hands, feeling the weight of the paper and the weight of the truth it represented. The rain continued outside, washing the dirt roads, but inside the house, a much larger storm began to brew. Osvaldo knew he could no longer go back. That day, that conversation had broken the last thread of his patience, the last hope for disinterested love. He needed to act. But how? He needed a way to show them, and the world, who he really was, without it seeming like revenge. Or perhaps, yes, revenge, but a just revenge. He had to rewrite his own story and theirs, once and for all. What would a man do when trust is broken and truth is the only weapon left? Osvaldo knew there was no turning back. That day would not be just another rainy day in São Miguel do Campo. It was the day the silence broke, when the truth, however painful, needed to be rewritten. But how would a man his age, accustomed to discretion and guarding his secrets, take the first step to unravel a lifetime of cunning? He had to act, and fast. The bank statement in his hands, the first object of a hidden story, seemed to burn. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that he wasn't the Osvaldo his children imagined, the frail, penniless old man. He spent the following days in a different kind of quietness, not the resigned quietness of before, but the concentrated calm of someone planning. Ricardo and Sonia, oblivious to the storm they had provoked, called with the same perfunctory frequency, asking about his health, about the house, but never about him, the man behind the wrinkles. Osvaldo replied with monosyllables, his voice a little hoarser than usual, but they didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. Is love always conditional on what one expects to receive? The first step was the most delicate. He needed a lawyer, but not one from São Miguel do Campo, where everyone knew everyone, and any unusual step would become gossip before breakfast. He needed someone discreet, beyond the reach of the village's curious eyes. He thought of Diamantina, the neighboring city, larger, more impersonal. There he would just be another client, an elderly gentleman seeking advice. With the decision made, Osvaldo began to organize his papers. There weren't many, but each one carried a piece of his silent fortune. Besides the bank statement, he had a small album of old photos. Not family photos, but faded images of land, of simple houses he had bought and renovated with his own hands, selling them years later for a much higher value. They were visual proofs of his business acumen, of a knack no one in São Miguel do Campo suspected. Those photos kept at the bottom of that brown envelope were the second object, the second layer of his secret life. His children, if they saw them, might think they were just memories of their father's youth, without realizing the real value each piece of land there represented. He felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't pure anger, but a deep sadness, a mourning for what could have been. He had dreamed of unconditional love, of children who saw him beyond money, beyond what he could leave behind. But the dream had vanished like smoke, carried away by the crude words he had heard. What was the price of a life of secrets, after all? A few days later, Osvaldo asked a trusted neighbor, young Zé, to drive him to Diamantina. Zé, a helpful young man who always assisted him with groceries, didn't ask questions. Osvaldo claimed a doctor's appointment, an excuse few would dispute for a man his age. In the big city, he found the office of Dr. Almeida, a lawyer known for his discretion and competence. Sitting before the lawyer, Osvaldo took a deep breath. It was the first time he had opened his financial heart to anyone. He told his story, the life of saving, the hidden investments, the fortune patiently built, brick by brick, seed by seed. And then, his voice choked with emotion, he narrated the conversation he had overheard Ricardo and Sonia's words. Dr. Almeida listened attentively, without judgment, only with the professional seriousness of someone who understands the weight of human decisions. Osvaldo handed over the bank statements, the photos of the land and a list of properties he discreetly owned. They were small farms, plots on the outskirts of growing cities, commercial points rented in São Miguel do Campo that no one connected to him. The lawyer's eyes widened, surprised by the magnitude of the elderly man's assets. "Mr. Osvaldo," Dr. Almeida said, "you are a much richer man than anyone could imagine. This is impressive." Osvaldo merely nodded without pride, only with the bitterness of someone who sees the value of a life measured in figures, not in affection. He asked to change his will so that his children would not receive the inheritance they expected from a poor Osvaldo. But he didn't just want to cut them off. He wanted the truth to come out, for them to know what they had lost due to their lack of genuine love. He wanted poetic justice to be served, not with revenge, but with the revelation of a lesson they needed to learn. If you have ever felt the weight of a hidden truth, of a silent injustice, You know how important it is for the truth to come to light. That's why stories like Osvaldo's need to be told. Join us on this journey to unravel what really happened. Comment below with the hashtag #JupterWill and tell us what has surprised you most so far. Your voice makes a difference in our community. Osvaldo instructed the lawyer to include a special clause in the new will. It wasn't just about who would inherit what, but about the conditions of that inheritance, about the gradual revelation of what he truly owned. Dr. Almeida, accustomed to all kinds of requests, found Osvaldo's request unusual, but understood the depth of his pain. "You want them to know what they lost, don't you?" the lawyer asked. Osvaldo merely shook his head, his eyes moist. It was more than that. He wanted them to know who he was, the man they had failed to see, and what would happen when the truth finally came out. Osvaldo left Dr. Almeida's office with a mix of relief and renewed pain. The weight of the secret began to be shared, but the bitterness of the decision still tightened his chest. He had chosen a path of no return and knew the consequences would be harsh, not only for his children, but also for himself. The truth, often, is a double-edged sword. Was he prepared to see what that blade would reveal? Back in São Miguel do Campo, life continued its slow, predictable pace. Osvaldo resumed his routine, sitting on the porch, watching the rain fall or the scorching sun. But now, every gesture, every word from his children took on new meaning. Ricardo and Sonia's perfunctory visits continued, but for Osvaldo, they were like scenes from a poorly rehearsed play. They asked about his health, about the house, but their eyes never fixed on him, the man, the father. They were always slightly averted, as if searching for something more, something he knew they wouldn't find on the surface. One afternoon, Sonia called, her voice full of false enthusiasm. "Dad, Ricardo and I were thinking, this house is so big, isn't it? And you're all alone. Wouldn't it be good to have someone to help out, to take care of the yard, keep you company?" Osvaldo listened, his heart heavy. He knew what she was getting at. It wasn't about companionship, it was about control, about having someone there to monitor what he did, who he spoke to. He refused, gently, but firmly. "No, my dear. I manage fine. I like my peace." Her sigh on the other end of the line was almost inaudible, but to Osvaldo it was a cry of frustration. They wouldn't give up. Ricardo, in turn, began to show up more frequently, always with some excuse to check on house repairs. He inspected the walls, the roof, the plumbing, but Osvaldo felt that, in reality, he was inspecting the value, the potential of that property. Once, Ricardo found the old wooden chest in the attic where Osvaldo kept some old objects. "Dad, what do you keep in here? These old things are worthless. They just collect dust." He tried to open the chest, but Osvaldo stopped him with an agility Ricardo didn't expect. "They are my memories, Ricardo. Leave them in peace." The tension in the air was almost palpable. Osvaldo knew that the chest held not only memories, but also some old land deeds he had bought decades ago, before they were registered in the name of companies he controlled. He kept them there, waiting for the right moment. This chest, with its hidden deeds, was the third object of his revelation. With each visit, each call, the subtle pressure increased. Osvaldo felt like a rat in a maze, with his own children acting as predators. The loneliness that was once an echo was now a weight, a burden he carried alone. He wondered if he was doing the right thing. Would it be so bad if they inherited everything without knowing? But the image of that rainy day, Ricardo and Sonia's crude words, came back like a whip. No, he needed to move forward. The lesson needed to be learned. Dr. Almeida in Diamantina worked diligently. He had requested the public records of the properties Osvaldo owned, confirming every detail, every purchase and sale the old man had made over the years. They were piles of papers, records in notaries of different cities, proving a much larger patrimony than anyone could imagine. The lawyer, in a discreet call, informed Osvaldo that everything was in order. The deeds, the rental contracts, the proofs of purchase of lands that were now worth a fortune. Everything was being organized for the new will. This set of official, legally validated documents was the fourth and decisive proof object. They confirmed the extent of Osvaldo's fortune, a wealth he had built silently, away from curious eyes and greedy hands. Meanwhile, in São Miguel do Campo, Ricardo and Sonia continued their maneuvers. Ricardo suggested that Osvaldo sell a small plot of land at the back of the house to avoid so much maintenance work. He already had a buyer in mind, a friend who would make a fair price. Osvaldo knew that the land in question was one of the few properties still in his direct name, and that Ricardo probably wanted a fat commission on the sale. The old man, however, refused with the excuse that he liked that piece of land for the chickens. Ricardo didn't insist, but his eyes betrayed his frustration. With each small victory against his children's attempts, Osvaldo felt momentary relief, but the pain of seeing the truth about them confirmed was constant. He wondered if they would one day regret it, if they would understand the value of affection above money. The distance between father and children, which was once a mist, was now a deep abyss. But he was determined to cross it, even if to do so he had to demolish all the bridges they had built on falsehood. What would it take for them to see the truth, not just about money, but about a father's heart? The answer came, as always, disguised as care. A week later, Ricardo and Sonia appeared together, unannounced, with a grave look that Osvaldo knew well. They brought no cakes or flowers, but papers in their hands, and an air of coming for an intervention. Sonia, with a voice sweeter than usual, began, "Dad, we are very worried about you. Your memory, the house, all this loneliness. We thought it might not be safe for you to live alone anymore." Ricardo, with a folder of documents, added, without mincing words, "We thought it would be good to have a legal guardian, someone who can help you manage your assets, your decisions, for your own safety, Dad." Osvaldo felt his blood run cold. It wasn't a request, it was a sentence. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to nullify him, the perfect excuse to take control of everything. This was the limit. The invisible line he had drawn between patience and action was irremediably crossed. The pain of betrayal was palpable, but strangely, it was accompanied by crystalline clarity. The fog of feelings dissipated, leaving only the firmness of an unwavering decision. What they didn't know was that, while they planned his ruin, he had already rewritten the game. With a calm that surprised his own children, Osvaldo invited them to sit. "I have something important for you, a last family meeting, so to speak." His voice, though hoarse, carried an authority that Ricardo and Sonia hadn't heard for years. They exchanged glances, confused. They expected resistance, not an invitation. Osvaldo then picked up the landline phone, dialed a number, and spoke slowly. "Dr. Almeida?" "Yes, it's me, Osvaldo. You can come. The time has come." Ricardo and Sonia turned pale. "Dr. Almeida? What would a lawyer from Diamantina do there?" The wooden chest in the attic, the discreet bank statements, the old photos of land, all of this, which they considered irrelevant or easily discardable, began to swirl in their minds, gaining new weight, a terrifying dimension. The feeling that a piece was missing now turned into a chilling premonition, an abyss opening beneath their feet. Could the old father, whom they had so underestimated, be about to play a trick on them? The wait for the lawyer was agonizing. The smell of freshly brewed coffee in the kitchen, which once brought comfort, now seemed suffocating. Ricardo tried to disguise his nervousness, adjusting his shirt collar. Sonia, her face pale, avoided Osvaldo's gaze. The silence in the room was heavy, interrupted only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall, which seemed to count the seconds to an inevitable revelation. Osvaldo, in turn, watched them with a serenity that bordered on sadness, but without regret. He had given them the chance to see him, to love him, but they chose to see only what was convenient for them. When Dr. Almeida's car stopped at the door, Ricardo and Sonia felt a shiver. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and a leather briefcase in his hands, entered the house with the formality of a messenger of fate. After the perfunctory greetings, he sat down, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a pile of documents. "Mr. Ricardo and Mrs. Sonia," the lawyer began, his voice calm but laden with a formality that cut through the air. "I was approached by your father, Mr. Osvaldo, to discuss a matter of extreme importance, the revision of his will." Ricardo and Sonia stirred in their chairs. Will? But their father was fine, despite his age. They expected a conversation about his safety, about guardianship, not about the division of assets that, in their minds, were few. "But Dr. Almeida," Ricardo interjected, his voice trembling, "our father is lucid, isn't he? There's no need for this now. We came to discuss his health." The lawyer raised a hand, requesting silence. Mr. Osvaldo is perfectly lucid, and it was precisely because of his lucidity that he sought me out. He presented me with a series of documents that prove a considerable patrimony, far beyond what the community of São Miguel do Campo, and perhaps even you, imagine. He picked up the first stack of papers. Here are the bank statements of an investment account at a Diamantina agency, which Mr. Osvaldo has maintained for decades. He flipped through, showing the numbers that jumped out at them. Ricardo and Sonia's eyes widened, their faces pale. The values were astronomical, much larger than the old house and the small plot of land they had in mind. The statement Osvaldo kept in the brown envelope, which they never bothered to look at, was just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Almeida continued, with every word a precise blow. Furthermore, Mr. Osvaldo owns several rural and urban properties. I have here an album of photos, with records of buying and selling land that today are worth a fortune. These are the lands he bought with vision, which you may have seen as old memories of your father. He opened the album, showing the faded images that now revealed a silent empire. The simple houses, the plots that Ricardo and Sonia deemed worthless, were now proof of a sharp business mind. Sonia brought her hand to her mouth, a sob caught in her throat. Ricardo, once so confident, was now in shock, his posture collapsing. They felt as if the ground were opening beneath their feet. Their father, old Osvaldo, whom they considered a burden, was the true master of the game. Why had he never said anything? And there's more, the lawyer continued, pulling out a set of deeds and notary records. These are the deeds of the properties he kept in the wooden chest in the attic, which you, Ricardo, considered old things. And here, the public records that prove the ownership and updated value of each one. They are farms, commercial points, plots in expanding areas that Mr. Osvaldo acquired throughout his life, never flaunting his fortune. The room fell silent, a heavy silence of revelation. The rain outside seemed to have stopped, but a storm of emotions was brewing inside. Ricardo and Sonia looked at their father, now with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The man they had judged, despised, and planned to control was the true master of the game. Osvaldo, in his rocking chair, watched the scene with tired but firm eyes. There was no triumph in his gaze, only the bitter confirmation of a truth he already knew. They didn't love him. They loved the idea of what he could have, and now, the idea of what he actually had. Mr. Osvaldo, upon learning of your perception of his condition and the future of his patrimony, Dr. Almeida continued, his voice grave, decided to rewrite his will, and he included a special clause. The lawyer paused dramatically, letting the words echo. The inheritance you expected, that based on the image of a penniless father, is no longer the same. Mr. Osvaldo decided that the greater part of his patrimony will be destined to charitable institutions and a development fund for São Miguel do Campo, with a small, symbolic part for you. The words hit Ricardo and Sonia like lightning. A small part? Symbolic? What had they lost due to their greed, their lack of true love? The shock was undisguisable, the humiliation evident. They had underestimated their father, and now they were paying the price. This was the turning point, the plausible shock that unveiled a lifetime of secrets and revealed everyone's true face. Ricardo, pale and his voice choked with anger and disbelief, tried to protest. "This is absurd. Dad is being manipulated. It can't be." Sonia, her eyes welling up, looked at Osvaldo, searching for an explanation, a sign that this was a cruel joke, but her father's gaze was unwavering. Osvaldo then broke the silence, his hoarse voice filling the space. "You taught me a lesson, my children. Now I teach you another. Love cannot be bought and loyalty cannot be negotiated. What you lost was not money, but the chance to have a father who truly loved you, not for what he possessed, but for who he was." The truth, raw and painful, had finally come to light, and with it the certainty that Osvaldo's life would never be the same. What would be Ricardo and Sonia's fate in the face of such a revelation, in the face of the mirror that showed them their own souls? Ricardo and Sonia, speechless, felt the ground disappear. The image of their father, whom they judged fragile and penniless, crumbled. Each bank statement, each faded photo of land, each deed shown by the lawyer, was a blow. The old things they scorned were, in fact, the pillars of a vast fortune that now escaped them. The humiliation was an overwhelming weight. If this story touches something you've experienced, subscribe now and comment on what this story taught you. Consider supporting us with a like. Your support drives these stories and helps us bring more accounts that make us reflect on life. Osvaldo's voice, though soft, resonated. You taught me a lesson, my children. Now I teach you another. Love cannot be bought and loyalty cannot be negotiated. What you lost was not money, but the chance to have a father who truly loved you. Sonia felt tears come, not from sadness for her father, but from anger and regret. Ricardo, head bowed, realized that the true inheritance had been squandered long before. The price of unlove was high. Dr. Almeida collected the documents. Poetic justice had been served. Osvaldo, despite the victory, felt an emptiness. It wasn't the joy of triumph, but the sadness of a lesson that should not have been necessary. Ricardo and Sonia left with hunched shoulders, carrying the weight of a devastating truth. They arrived with plans for control, but left stripped of inheritance and an illusion. Old Osvaldo, whom they thought was a burden, revealed himself to be the driver of his own destiny. Osvaldo remained in the empty room, the smell of cold coffee and the dust of a lifetime of secrets lingering in the air. The house, once a refuge for his loneliness, now seemed like a stage where truth at last had played out. He felt no joy, nor the sweet taste of revenge. Only a bitter peace, the relief of a burden that, for 80 years, he had carried in silence. That stubborn pride, that vain hope of being loved unconditionally, had come at a high cost, but finally freed him from an illusion. Ricardo and Sonia, in turn, went their separate ways, but with a common inheritance: the weight of what they lost. Their greed blinded them to the man their father truly was, to the simple life he chose to display, while building a silent legacy. They learned, the hard way, that the richness of a heart is not measured in possessions, and that genuine love is the only priceless treasure. The community of São Miguel do Campo over the years would come to benefit from Osvaldo's posthumous generosity with the construction of schools and hospitals, a true development for the city. The man they considered a quiet old man became the benefactor, the silent guardian of a better future for all, except for those who betrayed him. And so, the fine rain that kissed the tile roof of Osvaldo's porch at the beginning of everything was not just falling water. It was the prelude to a story about choices, about the value of being seen for who you are and not for what you have. It was the melody of justice that, though late, resonated with the force of a dammed river, overflowing with truths. In the end, Osvaldo found the peace he so sought, not in the arms of his children, but in the certainty of having lived, and in his own way, having loved and been faithful to his own values. The lesson was clear. True inheritance is not in what you receive, but in what you learn and leave for the world. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel now, leave your comment about what this story taught you, using the hashtag #JewUnexpectedInheritance, and give it a like. Tell me where you're watching from so I can recognize you and know who is with us on this journey of stories. Thank you for staying until the end and supporting our channel.